Welcome on in to the Chicago Bears podcast, January 8th edition. I am Jeff Meller in for Pat the Designer today. And as you can see or hear, Jason McKie is my co-host today. J-Mac, we got a lot of information yesterday as the Bears triumvirate of front office power met the media yesterday. We heard from Ryan Poles, we heard from Kevin Warren, we heard from George McCaskey as they get set to go out on a search for the new head coach. This is obviously a critical hire. We're going to let you hear a little bit from Poles, Warren, and McCaskey coming up here shortly. But J-Mac, just initially, before we get into some of that, and we'll also jump into some of the candidates who have been linked to the Bears, just your initial thoughts from some of what you heard yesterday when the Bears brass met the media.
Nothing different from what I expected. They said everything that I'm not going to say everything that we wanted to hear, but nothing surprised me from what they said. I think George McCaskey made it clear on how the hierarchy works, on how the structure would work. He re-emphasized that. I think that was something that we questioned here, whether whoever the head coach would be, would he just report to the GM? I mean, not to GM, but would he just report to the McCaskies? Would he just report to the GM? And George made that very clear on how that would work. So he cleared that up, but nothing that nothing that really surprised me. I think the list, as we know, as we'll go through it in terms of head coaching candidates, keeps growing. I don't even know where the list stands right now. Every time I look up, it's somebody new they're interviewing. I didn't see Happy Gilmore's name on the list. I'm pretty upset about that.
Not yet, J-Mac.
I got a couple cousins that may want to apply for the job too. No, let me stop. But no, it's I guess they're
listen, J-Mac, you have some head coaching experience as a high school head coach. So if anything, I think you've got a few guys on this list that you actually trump based on that experience. No, but listen, you teed us up there with the George McCaskey soundbite. So that's something I want to play for people who may not have heard it yesterday when the Bears did meet with the media. So, and I will say it was a very conscious decision by the Bears to put Ryan Poles out in front of the media by himself yesterday. They chose to do that. I think they probably heard about how when Kevin Warren and Ryan Poles met the media on the Monday after Thanksgiving, after they were firing Matt Eberflus, the last time they publicly met the Chicago media together, they probably heard some of the criticism that came about in that, I think, was a 21-minute meet and greet with the media where Kevin Warren spoke for about 8-9 minutes before they even took any questions. So it was a conscious and deliberate choice to put Ryan Poles out in front yesterday. Kevin Warren and George McCaskey, after Ryan Poles was done taking questions yesterday, they met with the media on the side there. And you mentioned it. George McCaskey was very clear because he was asked about how, would it be a deal breaker potentially if there's a head coaching candidate out there who is not necessarily happy with Ryan Poles being his boss? And this is how George McCaskey answered that question. All right, so you pointed it out, J-Mac, and he made it very clear that he's the top man, of course, and we all know Kevin Warren's the president. Underneath him will be Ryan Poles, and then, according to George McCaskey, the way this plays out is that whoever's hired as the head coach will report to Ryan Poles. Now, the one thing in the final piece of that answer where he said, listen, it's never been my experience where that's a deal breaker. In fact, and I would say it's understandable that most people do want the job.
Right.
However, the one thing that I will push back on, and I'm sure you have your own thoughts on, is that when there are the highly sought after candidates out there who have leverage and other opportunities, that's where they may have requests. And that's where you, I guess, some people, some organizations might be a little more willing and open-minded if there is a candidate that they truly want. They might be open to a different structure. George made it clear yesterday that is not the case in Chicago.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it, right, you talk about these high-level coaches, they're looking for alignment, and that's alignment from the top down. So if my vision is not in line with the vision of the people upstairs, right, but then my vision as a head coach, I don't have a staff that's visions aligned with mine, there's going to be controversy, there's going to be turmoil, there's going to be confusion, right? And what have we seen here in Chicago over and over and over again? We've seen confusion, we've seen mishirings, we've seen firings, we've seen, a coach that started off as a pass game coordinator, went from a pass game coordinator to an OC to a head coach. You see a lot of dysfunction. So I think that with what George said, he brought clarity into how the hierarchy would work. So, a head coach going into this interview process, he already knows that. But at the same time, there has to be alignment. If there's no alignment in terms of the way I just described it, it's not going to work, right? Because you have a coach coming in here that may have a clear vision and may have a clear plan, right, in terms of development and all those good things on how to transcend this franchise, how to get it back on a winning track. But if his vision is not appealing to the higher ups, or it doesn't align with what their vision is, then that coach may not come here, and he may go find a situation that aligns him up for success, right? Sustained success, right? No coach wants to come in for 2 or 3 years and be fired. You know what I'm saying? It's going to go on their coaching resume. It's going to make it harder for them to get a job. If they come into a situation where they feel like, hey, you know what? I'm set up for success. And if I fail, it's going to be entirely because I didn't do my job, not because I was getting pushback from people upstairs in terms of alignment and things I wanted to do. Well, then that plays a huge factor in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because when you think about especially potential candidates here who have not had head coaching experience, oftentimes that if things don't go well, you are one and done and you don't get another shot to be a head coach in the NFL. Now, if you have a little bit of success, you might be able to parlay a decent run into a second opportunity if things don't go the way you want. But that's why I think when you have the more desirable candidates that we all know of, those are the players that, if you're truly serious about putting the Bears franchise onto a winning path, I think that's where it would be, I guess, prudent to at least maybe not make it so black and white the way George McCaskey did. He did, so we'll see if it actually affects them, though, ultimately. One thing Ryan Poles did say, though, and this might lead us nicely into, and maybe I should say this, too. I think it was made pretty clear for anybody who had any doubt, Ryan Poles will be the GM. He will be hiring the next head coach. And that George McCaskey soundbite, I think, summed it up. Even if there is somebody who truly is out there, whether it be a Mike Vrabel or a Ben Johnson, who would have their own guy in mind, doesn't sound like that's a starter for George McCaskey. So Ryan Poles, it sounds like, will be the man in charge, running, as they say, points for this coaching search. And he talked yesterday about how they are going to leave no stone unturned in their search for the next Bears head coach. So there you go. He laid out 4 specific notes of what they're looking for. He wanted clear vision, developmental mindset, good game management. That would be nice. And a quarterback development plan, which we know is so important when you have so much invested in and around Caleb Williams, your first overall selection last year. Now, he mentioned they're going to dig deep here, right, J-Mac? And I think this gives us a perfect opportunity to jump into it. January 8th today, if you're listening to this now or watching within the last day or so, Mike Vrabel, as we speak, is, as at least being reported, currently interviewing with the Chicago Bears. There's also later today a report that Pete Carroll will be interviewing with the Bears, and as will Drew Petzing, the Cardinals' offensive coordinator. So those three current candidates will take place today. And then I'll run through the rest of the names, and then we can kind of pick apart some of them. Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. We know Ravens offensive coordinator Todd Monken, Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores, Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Also, Bears interim head coach Thomas Brown, we found out yesterday, will have an opportunity to interview. Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver. Giants offensive coordinator Mike Kafka, who actually is from here, local kid, went to St. Rita and Northwestern, and also worked with Ryan Poles during their days in Kansas City. Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, Broncos assistant, former Stanford head coach David Shaw, and then I'll add in one more who has not officially been reported as getting an interview, but who has been linked as someone who the Bears have expressed interest in, according to Michael Silver of the NFL Network. That is Vance Joseph, the Broncos' current defensive coordinator. All right. So I believe I listed 13 names there.
Yeah.
And I omitted one more. Cowboys' current head coach, well, currently under contract at least for 6 more days, and that's Mike McCarthy, who the Cowboys yesterday, we learned, declined permission for the Bears to interview with. So there is that 15 names I gave you now? That have been linked closely to the Bears. And then I'll add 2 more, which I find interesting, have been omitted, and that is Bucs offensive coordinator Liam Cohen and Commanders offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury.
Correct.
That is a lot of names, and Happy Gilmore is not included, J-Mac. So,
I mean, when I look at it, all right, I'm looking at this list, but before I go there, I want to go back to Ryan Poe's comments, kind of dissect the initial comments that he made, right? And he talked about a developmental mindset, right? First, he said clear vision. Every coach should have that, right? But the developmental mindset, I think it's so vague, right? So I look at this, when I look at this from a head coaching standpoint, right? But when I look at the Bears from afar, being around the team, covering the team all year, I look at it like this: developmental mindset. Yes, you got to have a coach that can develop players, right? Have we had that in the past? I would say no, we haven't, right? Because when you look at a developmental mindset, right? When I look at the plan as a head coach, right? The head coach, you got to have an offensive coordinator that's basically the head coach of the offense, right? But when you talk about developing a young quarterback, right? A young quarterback like we have in Caleb Williams, you got to have the assistant coaches, right? They're the biggest factor in this, right? Especially your quarterback coach, because your quarterback coach is going to be around your young quarterback majority of the time. They're going to have a bond and relationship that should extend beyond the building at Hallis Hall, but they got to have that trust factor where, if that quarterback has to know and trust that quarterback coach is doing everything that he can to develop him in the right way. So I look at it from that standpoint, and having a plan of who's the assistant coaches coming in with whoever this head coach is going to be. What are these assistant coaches' track record in terms of developing players, right? Not just players, but developing men. And you also talk about a developmental mindset, right? This head coach has to be able to develop the entire football organization, right? And when I say that, I mean like everything in that building, every position in that building has to be geared toward winning football games, has to be geared to making the playoffs, has to be at an elite level. If it's not that way, if you have people in that building that's not doing their job in that particular fashion, then they got to go because they're holding you back. And the great teams in this league, everything is set up on an elite level, right? And that's why you get elite results. That's why you get perennial playoff teams, right? Because everything in their building, every person employed in that building is helping them in some sort of way, aiding, helping them achieve every goal that they set out to achieve, right? So that's the building, that's the strength and conditioning, that's the nutrition, that's everybody that has a title that works for the Chicago Bears, right? Has to be in line with the clear vision of the coach, with that developmental mindset of, look, we're trying to achieve winning games here. We're trying to get to the playoffs, and our ultimate goal is winning the Super Bowl, right? If that's the clear vision, if you don't have a coach or alignment in terms of that clear vision, then it's not going to work, right? We'll go through the cycle again, bringing a new head coach, all the same things we've seen over and over again. So that's why I say when I hear Ryan Post talk about a developmental mindset, in my opinion, that developmental mindset extends beyond just the players. It's the entire building as a whole, being able to develop a winning culture, a winning environment, right? They throw out the word culture all the time. We need a leader of men, right? You need you need more than that. You need a master motivator. You need a guy that's going to come in there and demand excellence every time he sets foot in the building. But when he's in the building, everybody already has to know that we've got to be at our best at all times if we want to have great results. And that's stems from the players, the strength and conditioning coach, the, I don't know. I mean, it's just, you got to have that type of building if you want to have success. And we haven't had that. And that's why, we've been on a downward trend for a long time now.
And, you laid out beautifully. I think what's interesting here is my initial reaction is, are you interviewing too many people? And
Mm-hmm.
I understand Ryan Poles saying that they're going to leave no stone unturned. And that's a nice thing to say.
Right.
But the reality is, I think when you start looking at this list, I don't, you don't want to be victim of groupthink, but I think though there is some wisdom sometimes in understanding that there's a lot of people like beyond, hundreds of millions of people who follow the NFL very closely, right? Now, some obviously more closely than others, but there is somewhat of sometimes a wisdom to groupthink. And that this is where I think the Bears might be better off leaning into that, because I think the clear-cut candidates who are out there, we all know them out, like the top names, your Ben Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
your Mike Vrabel. To me, those two pop initially as the two clear standout candidates in this coaching cycle. I'll also add to the mix who I'm a little bit less certain of, but I think they certainly are worth a look. Our Vikings defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, Lions defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, Ravens OC, Todd Monken, Bills OC, Joe Brady.
Mm-hmm.
Those on the Bears who they've currently been linked to, those are the ones that truly pop. And maybe I'll even throw in Pete Carroll there because of what he's accomplished. Although I'm a bit concerned about the fact that Pete Carroll is 72 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I know he can put in a program. And he does have listen, enthusiasm is not something that Pete Carroll will ever be accused of lacking. So I think he has that going in the right direction. I'm just a little bit concerned at his age. Is this something that he would truly be in it for the long haul? But those candidates that I listed initially of the Bears, do you disagree with any of those, or do you think those are all serious candidates?
I think they are. I think those are the top candidates, and every candidate is going to have, you're going to have likes and you're going to have dislikes. And when I look at, I'll start with Ben Johnson. Obviously, when you look at it from what he's done in Detroit, everybody likes it, right? Everybody's enamored by what he's done with that offense, right? How he's been able to revitalize the career of Jared Goff, right? But also, and I'm not saying he's done a great job, and I'm not saying he's not going to be a great head coach. You know what I mean? And we don't know. It's still unknown because it's different being the head coach of an offense, being the coordinator of an offense, right? And mind you, I'm coordinating an offense that has a lot of pieces. It has a lot of weapons, right? I'm coordinating an offense that was built the right way, right? It was built up front, and then it was built expanding out, right? We got Jameson Williams, we got Amon-Ra St. Brown, we got Sam Laporta, right? And then we fortified the backfield. You got Jahmyr Gibbs, right? They signed David Montgomery, but it started up front. We got the best right tackle in the league. You know what I mean? Like, come on, man. So, the numbers, I'm not saying, I mean, he does a great job. And when you hear the players in Detroit talk about this, man, they rave about him. And I read an article the other day. Amon-Ra St. Brown said the first time that Ben Johnson got up and started installing plays, he was so detailed. I mean, to the fact on how he wanted the receivers to run each route based upon each route concept that they were installing. He said it was just different when he went to that board. And that's what you need. But at the same time, like I said, like it's you're orchestrating an offense that has pieces, right? And we know here in Chicago we're missing pieces, right? But here in Chicago, you're not just going to orchestrate an offense. You're going to orchestrate a team, right? That has shown a lot of dysfunction. You're going to inherit players, right? That didn't play to their standards the entire season. A lot of them came out and admitted it, right? I heard Kevin Byard, talk about it the other day on, I forget where I heard him. I want to give the station credit, but he was on an interview and he was saying that from a leadership standpoint, he wishes he would have spoke up more. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, if you're a leader and you're in that leadership position, you can't hold back. You've got to have the uncomfortable conversations. You got to speak up, right? You've got to hold your teammates accountable. And a lot of times you got to make them feel uncomfortable. And that's how you get results, right? But that it starts from the head coach trickles down to leaders, the leadership council, or the leaders that you have. But at the same time, it has to be upheld by the team, by the players. It can't be upheld by the coach, because then you're going to suck. It's got to be upheld by the players, right? And if the players ain't upholding that standard and that expectation on a daily basis, you're not going to be a good team. You won't be a good team at all. And that's where I think we failed. And players in the locker room have admitted it. You know, they weren't great leaders all the time. But if you want to have a successful team, you got to be great leaders. So when you see things happening in practice, you see guys not taking notes in meetings, you see guys not watching film, you see guys going through the motions in practice, you see guys walking out in practice, right? You got to nip that in the bud right now and have that uncomfortable conversation as a leader, right? If you don't, it's going to spiral. And what do we see, right? After the Washington Commanders game, after the Hail Mary, what happened? We fell off a cliff, right? Because where was the leadership? And that's the biggest problem, right? You got to have a coach that when he comes in that building, he's a master motivator. He can develop leaders, but you also have to have the right players in the building. That falls on the GM, that falls on the scouts, right? You got to be able to evaluate the right type of player that you feel can come in, right, and be a football player, right? That's mentally and physically tough. When adversity hits, they don't run away from it; they run towards it, right? And you got to continue to develop those guys as leaders, because they're going to be the cornerstones of your franchise for a long time. And until you have that type of structure, until you have that type of coach in mind, you can have a list of 50 people. But if you can't vet that right person to do those things, we will be here talking about this again in the next few years.
Listen, I completely agree with you. And it sounds like, specifically a couple of the things that you talked about are things that Kevin Warren mentioned: discipline and accountability, right?
Yep.
And that clearly is something that's going to be important for the next head coach to be able to step in to Hallis Hall and show that he's capable of doing. And hopefully that will be apparent during the interview process. My concern, though, back to the length of the list, J-Mac, is that when you're seeing this many people, every person who's going to be going through the interview process with the Bears is going to be putting their best foot forward, right? They're going to be putting on the face that they think is going to land them the job. Now, I will say that a couple of, again, getting back to the most sought after candidates, guys like Mike Vrabel and Ben Johnson may walk into their interviews with the Bears with a little more confidence, and they may be they'll be more willing to treat it as them interviewing the Bears as opposed to the Bears directly interviewing them, because you hear it from all the NFL insiders. Those two candidates, if they want, they're going to have a job during this cycle. Now it may not be the exact one they want, because they're going to be competing with each other in some ways, but the Patriots job looks very appealing, and it looks like Mike Vrabel might have a foot up on the other candidates the way that is proceeding with them. He's interviewing with the Patriots on Thursday, and they have Drake May in place, and they also have a lot of cap room and a lot of draft capital. So the Patriots job is, I think, very enticing for some of the candidates out there. The Jaguars job, maybe not as enticing to some, but others may see Trevor Lawrence as a quarterback who has had success in the league, who's brought his team to the playoffs, and who has an ownership in Shad Khan, who, while they haven't gotten things right, is more than willing to spend. And conversely, what's different is Shad Khan, the other day, when he was asked specifically about if there's a head coach who wants to bring in their own player personnel / GM into the Jaguars role, would you be open to that? Shad Khan, while doing a Zoom, J-Mac, with Trent Baalke, alongside him, just like I am with you right now, Shad Khan said, listen, it depends on the candidate, but that if that's the case, that's something we have to be open to.
Yeah.
And so, you see there's differences and approaches to organizations. And so I know, even though George McCaskey believes that this will be, and Kevin Warren as well thinks this will be, one of the most sought after jobs because of, I think, Caleb Williams' presence, I think you also should be aware that there are a few other teams out there lurking that have very enticing options. That's not always the case in every coaching hiring cycle. Sometimes you'll have 5 or 6 job openings, J-Mac, and none of them are very desirable at all because of the quarterback situation, because the roster's terrible. There's no cap room. You've traded away draft picks. That's not the case. I think there's 3 pretty good jobs open right now. And so even though the Bears think they have a very sought after spot, they're competing against 2 other ones that are interesting. And I'll add in a 4th, the Raiders, who Tom Brady seems to have more and more power as the days go by. So there's a lot of interesting jobs available. And so even though the Bears they're gonna land a candidate,
Yeah.
will they land the best candidate, the candidate they deem the best candidate?
Yeah, and I think to your point too, Jeff, I think it goes back to, right, when we talk about the hierarchy and the reporting structure, right? If I'm a head coach and I'm interviewing for one of these jobs, and I know that I'm going to have a lot of the control in terms of how I want to build my team, myself and the GM. I'm not reporting to 4 or 5 different people. So I know that if I fail at this job, it's going to be because of me. You know what I mean? And I'm going to have an opportunity to build the team the way I want to build it, right? And then other jobs, like we're talking about, and the possibility with the Bears is now you come here, right? Are you going to really have your true fingerprint on this team the way you want it to be built, or are you going to be handcuffed in certain ways in which you want to make certain decisions that as a coach that can help this team, but you've got to report to 2 or 3 different people, and you're a yes, and they're telling you no, but this decision could impact this team in a positive way, but management sees it differently. Then that's the power struggle. That some of these candidates aren't going to want to be in. They want to know if I'm going to succeed or if I'm going to fail. It's going to be because of me. It's not going to be because I'm handicapped by other factors from the executives upstairs.
Yeah, and that's where I get back to someone like Ben Johnson. If he truly wants his own player personnel guy to come in, that's where a job like the Jags might be more appealing to him, because he says, you know what, the owner's willing to let me do it that way, like you just said, J-Mac. And listen, there's lots of ways to win in the NFL. And I will say,
Mhm.
of all these candidates, I think there's probably 2, 3 who the Bears could hire who could actually end up having success in the league. Now, some might have more success than others, and that ultimately is what the Bears are trying to do, is land the best candidate who could lead them to multiple Super Bowls. That's obviously the plan in place, but you can do it multiple ways. I've talked to you on the post-game show several times in the past couple of years. Kyle Shanahan, he handpicked John Lynch to be his player personnel guy, his GM in San Francisco. And that might be what Ben Johnson is looking for. It may not be. He may say, okay, I like Ryan Poles. I think based on how the interview goes, maybe I can work with him. But what's interesting is you talked about the power struggle that sometimes exists, right, in NFL front offices. I think this is a good opportunity to play the Kevin Warren soundbite, because a lot of people asked Ryan Poles yesterday specifically if he has been extended as the general manager of the Chicago Bears. He didn't want to get into it. Kevin Warren, though, did reveal something that I found a little bit interesting in the way he said it yesterday. So you love the confidence from Kevin Warren, but interesting, a year is a lifetime. So that was basically the way I interpreted that, J-Mac, is, listen, Ryan Poles is our general manager right now. He's going
Yep.
to be responsible for hiring the next head coach.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's a little bit of pressure being applied there by Kevin Warren, because there's no guarantee that Ryan Poles will be here for the long term. And that gets back to that power struggle dynamic, right? Someone like Mike Vrabel, someone like Ben Johnson might watch Ryan Poles yesterday, not always, convicted or showing extreme confidence when he's meeting the media at the lectern yesterday. And they might see that as a bit of a weakness on the Bears organization. It could be a bad sign for them, but it also could be in some ways appealing, because if you're Ben Johnson or if you're Mike Vrabel, you could say, I could go in there in a year, and if things don't go exactly the way I want after that first year, as long as it's not an absolute disaster on the field, if I show a little market improvement, you could flex your muscle as that new head coach hire and very easily push Ryan Poles aside.
Yeah.
That may not be the ideal fit, but I'm just pointing out that the way the Bears have set this up and the way they have not fully endorsed Ryan Poles with a contract extension, at least not publicly saying that, you've left the door open for that potential to exist a year from now.
Yeah, and like we say, it's all speculation. We don't know the status of Ryan Poles' contract. It hasn't been disclosed. But here's the thing, right? You're talking about, you're talking about hiring a coach for the long term, right? You're talking about hiring a coach that's going to bring stability, right? That's going to bring, a winning culture, a championship mindset, all those good adjectives that you use in a press conference, right? But at the same time, without knowing the status of Ryan Poles, you're bringing in a coach, right? His first year is going to be unstable, right? There's no stability because you don't know that my boss that I'm working with my first year, right, to help turn this team around may not be here the following year. You know what I'm saying? So it's still instability. So it just doesn't make any sense, right? I'm trying to bring in a coach here for the long haul, but now the GM is, we don't know. We don't know what his status is. So that's something too that, like we talked about, Jeff, can deter a lot of these coaching candidates from wanting to take this job. Do I think this is a good job? Heck yeah, it's a great job. It's nothing like, winning here in Chicago. It's nothing like it. It's a big market. It's a big opportunity for a coach to come in here and turn one of the most storied franchises around in the NFL. And you do have pieces. You do have some good pieces. Yes, we need some, to add more things and a lot of things we've been talking about throughout this podcast. Yes. But at the same time, it is a great opportunity for a coach to come here and be successful, right? But at the same time, there's still instability because now you're sitting there saying, am I working with Ryan Poles for just this year? What is the future? Like you're trying to convince one of these high level candidates to come here, right? Talking about, hey, we got the quarterback, we got this, you got this. But what about the GM? If I'm the head coach, what about the GM? Am I working with it for a year? Can I bring in my guy the following year if he's not here? Like, what is the plan for the GM?
All right, so I think we've covered most of it, but let's rapid fire here, run through some of these candidates. And I just want to get initial reaction from you, your thoughts on some of these guys, how you feel about them. Again, not holding you accountable for any of this, but just your initial thought. Because like I said, I think that this list was a little bit smaller. I think it might be a better way for the Bears to spend their time in this process. So I'm going to start from the lower level candidates, the candidates that I don't believe are, or I don't personally believe should be as serious as some of the others. So initially, Broncos special assistant, former Stanford head coach David Shaw. He's been out of the game as a head coach for a while now.
Yeah, and a lot of these candidates, obviously I know David Shaw from his time at Stanford. I know he's well respected. He did well on the collegiate level. But as far as that, I don't think I would be in favor of some of these other guys. I like Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator for Detroit. I do like Brian Flores. I know he didn't have a lot of success in Miami, but there's a lot of other candidates that I personally like more than David Shaw just because he's been out of the loop for a while. So I can't really comment too much on him because I'd have to go back and do more research on David Shaw. But I know he was successful during his days out there at Stanford.
Steelers offensive coordinator Arthur Smith, former Falcons head coach, who was let go. He's been in Pittsburgh for 1 year. Honestly, the Steelers, they've limped into the playoffs over the last couple of weeks, and it certainly wasn't on the strength of their offense. I'm not overly enamored with Arthur Smith, J-Mac.
Yeah, I'm not either. For me, if I'm looking at Pittsburgh, I'm looking at Mike Tomlin. How can I, if I'm gonna look at somebody like I'm not, I mean, no
Tomlin.
Yes, no disrespect to Arthur Smith, but I've got a head coach who's, has not had a losing record, right? Did they have a losing record this year? No. What was the record this year?
No. The Steelers in the playoffs, 10-7.
Yeah, in the playoffs. So I got to double check, but he has not had a losing record.
Correct.
Since he's
never been below 500 his entire coaching career.
Right. And he's a guy who's demonstrated, right, being able to establish a culture, right? And we talk about that word culture. Like he understands what it takes to build leaders. He understands what it takes to develop a culture. And when you hear his players talk about it, right, his players take on the same personality as as the head coach, as a Mike Tomlin. So I'd be trying to find a way if I'm going to do something with any Pittsburgh coach, it'll be trying to trade or trying to find some way to get Mike Tomlin here.
Makes perfect sense to me. Giants offensive coordinator, local kid Mike Kafka, who knows Ryan Poles from their days in Kansas City.
Yeah. I mean, he's not. Look at the Giants offense, right? I mean, that tells you enough.
Enough said. There. Yeah, that's again okay. How about now? Dolphins defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver. Now I know I've read a lot of people think that he could be the quote unquote leader of men that the Bears are looking for, but at the same time, They had some success defensively in Miami, but it never wowed me personally. I think this might be a little too soon if you're looking to hire Anthony Weaver. I don't think he's proven enough as a coach on the
Yeah.
field.
Yeah, I just think there's like we talked about, some of the top level candidates are just, you'd rather have one of those guys who have been in a head coaching position like Brian Flores, also Mike Vrabel, which I think he's probably going to go to New England. I'm not sure. That's just my opinion. But I think there's other candidates that have a stronger resume than an Anthony Weaver.
About again, they've been declined permission, but within a week, if they want Mike McCarthy, as long as he doesn't sign an extension with the Cowboys, he will be no longer under contract for Dallas. How do you feel about Mike McCarthy?
Yeah, I think with him, it's you have a coach that's proven, a proven head coach, a Super Bowl winning head coach, a coach that has had success where he's been. He hasn't had a lot of success over there in Dallas, but during the time in Green Bay, he had a lot of success. Yes, he had a really good quarterback with Aaron Rodgers and things like that, but I think he would be intriguing. I like him better than Anthony Weaver, Mike Kafka, all the guys that you mentioned before. I would definitely take a Mike McCarthy over some of those guys. I think he might be the wild card depending on what happens with his contract situation there in Dallas.
I think you might be right. The question is, has he had enough of Jerry Jones in Dallas where he may be looking for that exit plan? I'll be honest. I look at Mike McCarthy as a good point A to point B head coach, but not necessarily someone who you feel confident to get you to point C. And what I mean by that is, you pointed out he's had a lot of success in his career, J-Mac.
Right.
He's in his career 174 wins, 112 losses, and 2 ties. So he's got a 608 winning percentage. He's won a Super Bowl back when Aaron Rodgers won it in Green Bay. He was the head coach. But what I get back to is why I don't think he is necessarily a point C coach, is because oftentimes what you'll see, you've seen it his entire time in Dallas, oftentimes as a home or a favorite in the playoffs, that's when his team ends up losing. And he lost quite frequently in Green Bay as a favorite. I can understand losing in the playoffs, especially if you're on the road against a superior team. But what I don't like about Mike McCarthy's track record is there were, several instances on his resume where the teams were hoping for more and they frequently came up short, years after that Super Bowl win. So that's where I'd be a little bit concerned about him. And then we jump to, like I said, all the hot names. We only got about 4 or 5 minutes left, J-Max. So feel free to just kind of highlight whoever you want of these final guys. Lions OC Ben Johnson, Lions defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn. We mentioned Vrabel, Ravens OC Todd Monken, Vikings defensive coordinator Brian Flores, and then Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Of those 6 guys, anybody that really stand out to you, or that you maybe don't like as much?
Yeah, I really like all of those guys. I like Brian Flores. I liked what he's defensively. I think he's a great defensive mind. He was the former head coach of the Dolphins, didn't have success there, and that can be, looked at as something negative, and it is, right? But at the same time, here's a guy who's had head coaching experience, right? And a lot of times when these coaches fail, you have to fail to succeed. So he can look back from his experiences of being a head coach and say, where did I fail? Where did I go wrong? How can I make this better? So I think he's an intriguing candidate. I also think Aaron Glenn, the DC for the Detroit Lions, is intriguing as well. I mean, look at what he's done with that defense, considering you've got how many guys that are on IR, how many guys have been out of that lineup, but each and every week he's put together a great game plan, right? He's been able to motivate guys off the street to come in, right, and play the Detroit Lions way and get results. You know what I'm saying? So I think that is very intriguing as well. Like I said, Ben Johnson is very intriguing. As we know, he's the hottest name right now. He's the guy that, a lot of people are calling to be the Bears' next head coach. He's got question marks because he's never been a head coach. You look at the way he's led this offense. Yes, it's really good. It's great. It's been one of the top offenses in the NFL, but you also have a lot of the top pieces as well, within that offense in terms of personnel. So, Mike Vrabel, I think with him, you're going to get that discipline. You're going to get that alpha male in the building. That's going to demand excellence, because that's the way it was when he was a player with the Patriots, right? It was the Patriot way. He had an opportunity to learn from one of the greatest ever, and Bill Belichick, who didn't put up with no BS. And, I think with him, though, it's just a matter of, with that Patriots job opening up, and, you can't just say it's a shoo-in, but is the package that the Bears present better than what we see over there in New England, something that he's known, something that he's played in, something that pretty much he's grew up in, that type of culture, so it's a lot of intriguing names. Let's hope the Bears get it right, because it's a long list.
It's interesting because and one more thing to point out here, because Mike Vrabel is interviewing with the Bears today, again, Wednesday, January 8th. He does have an interview scheduled with the Patriots tomorrow, which is Thursday, Jan 9, as we speak. So the Patriots are positioned to move quickly on Mike Vrabel. They've officially also interviewed Byron Leftwich and Pep Hamilton, which fulfills the Rooney Rule. So if the Patriots do want to go ahead and make Mike Vrabel an offer after interviewing him tomorrow, they're positioned to do so. You wonder if the Bears, based on their current list of candidates who they're linked with, have that flexibility, right? So what you're pointing out, it seems like the Patriots, the history with Vrabel actually being a member of their team Hall of Fame, right? So there's lots of reasons why that spot is very appealing to Mike Vrabel. So I think the Bears are going to be up against it, trying to land him, but it's not impossible, right? Like if there's a lot that you laid out that is working in the Bears' favor. I'm not sure if Vrabel, though, based on the other options for him, will find it as appealing as we might. But again, there's a lot of, I think, compelling candidates here. You mentioned Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson as well, and two more again that I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I'd like to see the Bears potentially interview with, and that would be Cliff Kingsbury and Liam Cohen. Kingsbury on the Commander's staff, Liam Cohen, the OC for the Bucs. Both of those teams are playing in the wild card weekend, so they won't be able to interview until next week. So maybe we'll get some news as the process unfolds that those two names are guys that the Bears could potentially look into as well. So other than that, any final words, J-Mac, before we call it a wrap here on the Bears podcast?
Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens. And, I just hope the way, we saw the names of who's actually going to be involved in the interview process, like who's going to be in the room while they're interviewing coaches. And, I just hope the process, right, in terms of how they do it or the structure in which they're going to do it in, I hope that changes, because I mean, the same results every year, the process and the way you're vetting these coaches isn't working. So I think you've got to do something different if you want different results. And that's just common sense.
I completely agree. There's, too many cooks in the kitchen, it looks like, with the Bears, the way they're going through this process. I'm hoping that if nothing else, they've gotten it wrong so many, the last 4 or 5 times they've had the opportunity to hire a head coach. Maybe, just maybe, they'll just have good fortune and they will find themselves, even if it's, through their own best abilities, maybe, just maybe, there's enough good coaching candidates on this list that no matter what, the Bears find the right one. That's the hope as Bears fans, J-Mac.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope we're not talking about this a few years from now. And it always happens, right? One of the candidates that's out there that wasn't a big name, that wasn't a hot topic, all of a sudden becomes a coach of the year, all of a sudden turns the franchise around. We see that up there in Minnesota. You see that with Dan Quinn over there with the Commanders. I mean, Dan Quinn was a guy who they brought in the building a couple times and, didn't really give him the time of day. And now look what he's done to that Commanders team. So it's, you never know. It's all a crapshoot anyway. But you've got to make sure you do your homework, and hopefully, like you said, we finally get lucky and hire the right guy to lead this team.
Great stuff. As always, subscribe to the Chicago Bears podcast on ESPN Chicago on YouTube. And, of course, you can always check it out on the ESPN Chicago app. Fresh episode there for you daily, Monday through Friday. J-Mac, talk to you later. Pat the Designer will be back soon. Thanks for watching and listening on the ESPN Chicago Bears Radio Network.